Hey everybody, guess who we have today? Chris Lehto. Hi Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice. It's always nice to speak to you, Chris. We live in interesting times. This has been a fantastically interesting week with an administration change and an egg. So let's plow straight into Jake Barber. Jake, during his service, was in a role that I don't know about. I've heard about Green Berets and I've heard about Navy SEALs. What was he doing at the Air Force? What was his role?
Okay, so yeah, the Air Force actually has the same tier one operators. You've heard of Navy SEALs for the Navy,
Mm,
you heard of Green Berets for the Army. Well, the Air Force actually has its own special forces as well, and they're really not known, but they're at the same level. They do the same ridiculous training just for a different mission. So what we focus on in the Air Force is combat search and rescue. So
mm,
really that's going behind enemy lines and saving pilots. Essentially, that's where the mission emerged from, and that's really what they focus on. So we have two main operators in that regime, right? You have what's called the PJs, and they're your pararescue special forces, and they're like super medics. They're trained in all of the medics, but they're also very good at shooting stuff. So they go in on these helicopters. Usually it's a Pave Hawk. It's an H-60, which incidentally,
yeah.
I think that's what we see in the video carrying the egg. It's
Oh,
like a modified, it's like an upgraded Black Hawk. It's called a Pave Hawk. So it has a bunch
yeah,
of
yeah.
additional sensors. Yeah, it can fly low level in the
Mm,
cloud, in the
mhm.
weather, do all this crazy stuff at night. And so the pararescue, the PJs go in and they actually descend down if you have a pilot behind enemy lines,
Yeah.
and they will hook up the pilot, get him set up to get into the helicopter. If it's in like forest, or some area where a helicopter can't get in, they'll actually,
Mm,
zip down or even do halo jumps. So they're trained to do all that sort of infill and exfil stuff, secure the people on the ground if it's more than one, make sure they're, stable medically, fight anyone off. Okay, so they are very
mm,
good at fighting. They're definitely the guys you want. They're the guys you want there because they're gonna shoot all the bad guys, and then if you're
sure.
shot, they will rescue you essentially. So that's the PJs. The other special forces we have in the Air Force is what Jake Barber was, and
Oh.
that's actually it's called a combat controller.
Mm,
And so what they do is they actually jump in behind enemy lines or they infill with other units. Like they'll go along with the Navy SEAL unit,
mm,
and their job is to coordinate all of your air assets, right? And that's where you get your big weapons. If you think about it, a Navy SEAL team is not going to be able to do very much on their own. You know, like I don't care like how good you are at fighting as a person. If I'm in a tank, there's very little you're going to be able to do to me, right? If you have a tank roll up,
sure, sure.
it could be a bad tank operator and they're still going to defeat a Navy SEAL
Mm,
team if they know where they are. So your Navy SEAL teams, et cetera, their highest casualty causing systems come from the air, right? Obviously, your biggest weapons come from air.
yeah.
So combat controllers, that's what they specialize in. So they're the guys that jump in behind enemy lines all alone, or they go in with another little small group, and they know how to coordinate exactly to get the air power there,
Uh,
in safe and out.
right.
Um, and so for combat search and rescue, you'll use both those guys. You'll use the PJs to actually rescue
Yeah.
the people on the ground, but use the combat controllers if they're there. Now, if I'm in the air as an F-16 pilot, um, I know exactly who to coordinate with, and now I have people on the ground who are going to give me close combat control and tell you where the bad guys are, where the good guys are.
Uh,
You're so scared of fratricide in a military environment like that, where you have good guys and bad guys on the ground,
yes. Mm,
really
mm,
close to each other. So
mm.
really hesitant to sort of drop any weapons without having really high situational awareness. And that's what those guys do, combat controllers. So they're your fighters on the ground that call in all of the air power.
Right.
And they're also trained in underwater ops. So they can do everything. They can dive, they can do the rebreathers, just like the Navy SEALs.
Uh,
They can do all the parachuting in. So yeah, they're the special forces you haven't heard about. And
no.
I think they're happy with that, actually,
Okay.
which is interesting because these guys don't like being on camera at all. Like never. They don't even like, I mean, they'll talk with you, but never on a camera, you know? So it's really, I can really feel for these guys. Going public with this is a really difficult decision. So yeah, that's really what Jake Barber, what his main job was as a combat controller.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I mean, yeah, and you really touched on what I want to say is that it must have been very hard for Jake to appear on camera. I think
Yeah.
hopefully News Nation and Ross and the News Nation organization are protecting him and working with him very closely. I mean, oh, we both know that being public on social media it can be pretty tricky. People who don't like what you're saying, can be quite negative. It must be it's even more amplified for Jake. But I would like to say I totally think Jake is upfront. He's real. He's accredited. He obviously did what he did. And yeah, what do you think Jake's going through? Tell me about the stress of being like you are on like we are on social media. What do you think Jake's going through?
I don't, I can't even imagine, the only thing
Uh,
I will say is that they've been talking about it behind the scenes. I didn't know who it was.
uh,
I didn't know his background. But I talked to Mike Herrera, almost a year and a half ago, over a year ago,
oh yeah.
and he said that these insiders are coming out. And I believed Michael Herrera, on his background. He had nothing to gain by coming out, and
Mm,
on just a personal level, I believed Mike Herrera, as well as his story aligned with, everything we considered. If they are extraterrestrial vehicles, why would they crash, if they're so advanced?
yeah, yeah, good point.
And his argument is because we're shooting them down. Why would
Right.
all of this be kept secret? What I've really ventured into is the physics, which
Mm,
I really think it has been suppressed over the last
hmm.
80 years. And I think it's really to keep our advantage, and not give
Yep.
away
Yep.
advanced secrets to enemy, terrorist organizations, etc.
Foreign actors. Yeah, no, I completely agree. What do you know about what Jake is doing now? Do you actually know who he actually is working for or where he's working?
I don't, like you, I've been kind of scrambling to get information. I will
Right.
see he is posting on X. So he
Okay.
came out just a couple days on X and said that News Nation will publish his full 2.5 hour interview. So we'll
Okay.
get a lot more information from that, as well as he said he'll answer questions on X after that. But
Sure.
that's, yeah, brand new, I guess, as well as Fred Baker. Because, these
Yeah.
guys, like I was saying earlier, is they probably had no social media presence before, ever. Like they wouldn't post. And this is just from knowing other fighter pilots. They're not going to post,
Yeah.
yeah, or they're hesitant to post any sort of information. I remember we had any sort of just a local news crew, not even a news crew, just a local reporter, anyone come to the base and ask if anyone wants to talk, and nobody would raise their hand. And I can't even imagine from
Right.
a special forces community,
Mm.
this has got to be totally foreign to them. There's very few, I think Sean Ryan, he's been a big public figure
Mm.
now, a YouTuber. He was Navy SEALs, and there's a few other Navy SEALs that come out, but I think for these special operators, it's especially difficult.
I would agree. I think it must be tough. I mean, I think everybody has an opinion, and there's a lot of different kind of ideas floating around, and it's really hurtful for people to criticize, Jake. What's he doing? Where was he? And or people blatantly saying, "I don't believe what he did." I mean, it's rubbish. I mean, he's obviously a genuine chap. I warmed to him, and I. Like you and I who have become semi-public figures to an extent, it's stressful. But do you think he's probably post service is now working, doing roughly the same job or some kind of recovery and security operation for a defense contractor, would you surmise?
Yes, yes. So that's what Mike Herrera said. So Mike Herrera met him
Right.
from what I understand, at the June 12th disclosure event that Stephen Greer hosted,
Oh,
and Mike Herrera told his story, and that's when he said that the containers that he saw in Indonesia had climate control. So he thought they were moving some sort of drugs, is what he said.
right.
And the insider, which I'm assuming at this point is obviously Jake Barber, basically came up to Mike after that and said, it's not drugs. I know what it is. And he
Mm.
said it's people is what they're actually moving. They're moving what they consider these assets, these psionic assets, or
Wow.
potential recruits. And so Mike was blown away by that, I think. And what ended up happening is Jake Barber flew Mike out to this black site
Right.
somewhere in California. And I actually met with a person online who was Mike Herrera's dead man switch, essentially, because Mike was really dubious about flying out to this location
Yeah.
with some random people he met, after giving this story. So
Yeah.
he was worried for his own safety actually going out there, but he said he's going to do it.
Yeah.
And so he gave a lot of this or all the information to this guy I met with online. Um, and he wanted to remain anonymous, obviously, but I confirmed his identity. And he actually tracked Jake. You could track the helicopter where it flew. You can actually track it on flight radar,
Yeah.
and he tracked it out to the location. So this guy online
Uh,
knew the location, and I didn't ask him for it, actually. I didn't want to
oh.
know.
Mm.
Like you said, being a public figure is difficult, and I don't really want information I can't publicize that I can't make public.
Yeah,
So I want
you're
to know
right.
the location.
I feel the same. My kind of um, catchphrase is the truth is out there is very much based on what other people know, but just occasionally using the more secretive type of email um, systems, which I don't trust, by the way. People send me stuff and I go, please, I don't know where you got that in, but I don't actually want it in my inbox. So share stuff that you know, but please don't share anything that even close to classified or that could affect national security. Um, as a pilot and as a people somebody, Chris, you know about Nellis, you know about this area, the test areas out there. Uh, I'm confused because Jake calls it the range, but he's not working for the DoD directly. So do you think defense contractors also have areas just in Nevada because it's out of the way? Have you heard that there's private areas or defense contractor areas out there? Any idea?
Yeah, definitely. There's many ranges. There's the
Yeah.
Uter in Utah. That's a huge range as well, where they do
Oh, okay. Okay.
missile tests. So we have these roped off, highly secure, classified ranges.
Right.
Yeah, all throughout the U.S. and usually out in the West, right? Because you don't want to be near the coast because you know, international waters is 10 miles off the coast. So
Ah,
legally, there's nothing illegal about posting a fishing boat
right.
right off the coast.
Right.
Nothing. And so you can't be stopped by anyone. And
Right.
so where are you going to put all your secret classified weapons tests, or any sort of this advanced technology? You're going to put it in the center of your country as best you can, away from populated areas. So in the U.S., that's mainly out in the West.
Right.
So Nevada has a huge area. Also, Arizona is a giant test range.
Oh,
Near Davis-Monthan is a giant test range. Goes from That's where I flew a lot of my missions. Was out of Phoenix. We flew out of Phoenix, and
oh,
that's a huge F-35 training base now because there is the Goldwater Range, Barry Goldwater Range, and that's another huge range. And so, yeah, all the defense contractors use these ranges, and you also
wow.
have the range. You have ranges along the border of California, and so I think
Yeah.
that's where he's talking about is he calls it the range, but
Yeah.
it's probably not the the Nellis, that range that they're talking about. I think he's referring to another range, which is further out west,
Okay.
along the California border. I guess yeah, it could be the same range on the western part of it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this. Me, from my incredibly basic background as a private pilot, is that military operation areas, if they're not a restricted area, you can have multiple. You can get permission to fly in them as long as you're under communication. So what I'm going with that is as I've done before about the Nimitz incident, that it's possible that there are multiple operators as long as they're in communication with a controlling authority. Yeah. So there might be the DOE and Lockheed Martin and the Air Force or whoever using a similar MOA.
100%. Yeah, they're all going to use the range for what they need. They'll schedule the range time.
Right, right.
Um, yeah, so we had, and it's always a battle to get access to range
Yeah,
time. And you schedule it through different services, and they'll rope off areas where
yeah,
no one can go in for sure. We have test ranges where nobody can go in,
yeah,
and those are usually the warning areas. That's interesting on the East Coast. Whiskey 72, that's the warning area that Ryan Graves that they were
yeah,
talking about. They were seeing all those the gimbal, and then
yeah, gimbal.
the other yeah the close pass that they saw was entering it was at
Yeah.
the entry point when he saw the cube within a sphere. One of the pilots had passed in between their formation. That
Wow.
was entering a warning area. So there are specific areas where you shouldn't have the doctor flying through in the Cessna. They will be
Right.
limited, and because you're shooting missiles, I think that's
Yeah.
why they waited to shoot down the Chinese spy balloon as well, because they're
Yeah.
waiting it to get into an area where they can employ weapons for obvious reasons, right? The
Obvious.
warning ranges are set up so that you don't have missiles flying into cities, et cetera. So you want it to be safe. So there's definitely areas where it's blocked off. The
Yeah.
Uter in Utah is a major one, as well as others. So yeah, they're all spread out. Defense contractors obviously use them,
Ah, right.
and Department of Energy for sure can get access. So yeah, anyone in the U.S. government,
Yeah.
assuming at a high enough level, can schedule these ranges and go and do their tests, et cetera.
That's really interesting, Chris. Thank you very much for your inside knowledge and and candid information about what actually happens. And yeah, so fascinating about the range. So let's just jump into what Jake and Ross Coulthard revealed on the video, where he obviously was doing a recovery on a strange object that looked egg-shaped. It was white. Jake describes it as the size of an SUV, so maybe 10, 14 foot long. Um, what was it that he saw, and what do you think was going on there, in your opinion?
I think he said it was 20 feet long,
Uh, right?
just to correct you there. Um, well, according to his testimony, I think the testimony is the most powerful part. And just
Mm,
the fact that these guys have come out public. And like I said earlier, they've been wanting to come out for the last year and a half.
okay.
That was their plan. So I think he authored the book Sentinels of Ether. They actually got a ghostwriter to write it, and it's a fiction book, and it
Ah,
is, yeah, pretty amazing. I would recommend anyone to check it out. The first two chapters are free online. I
okay.
did see on X that someone did a Freedom of Information Act request and apparently linked Jake Barber to that publication, which I guess shouldn't be possible, right? They shouldn't if you're using a pseudonym.
Right.
But he didn't share the information, the guy online, so I can't confirm that. But I think these guys published that book, and only the first two chapters were approved by Dobser, but it
Yeah.
was approved. And yeah, that's the Defense
Yeah.
Publication Review
Hmm.
process, which is a controversial process, right? They're just saying nothing is classified, so through the Dobser process. So they're kind of saying, "Oh, this doesn't exist because nothing's classified." But the
Yeah.
reason, according to Mike Herrera, that they do that is it puts the defense in a catch-22 position because in order to confirm something's not classified, they have to actually go and ask the offices, "Hey, do you have this technology?" So from what I understand, the first two chapters, they were released obviously a year ago, but the rest of the book has been held up by Dobser for since then, so several months. Um, and
Oh,
that's according to Mike Herrera, right? We haven't heard that directly from
right.
Jake Barber. And I think the true story is, if it's true, is going to blow everybody's minds, right?
Yeah.
Because it
Yeah.
involves really two major technologies, which I believe, personally, I believe have been suppressed on purpose. And the first major technology is related to consciousness
Mm,
and telepathy. If you
yeah.
look at like the Stargate program, the CIA had remote viewing.
Yep.
Basically, the argument that they're saying is that you can control this advanced technology with mind control, essentially. It's all linked through some sort of telepathic process. And
Right.
so that's going to be a big bridge for people to cross
Yep.
because telepathy is not possible, right, in our current science. Although I do think there's a lot of data if you look at Dean Radin, if you actually go and look,
Yep. There is.
if you look,
Mm,
there's a lot of data. Rupert Sheldrake, he's
right.
shown actually a lot of really compelling data as well. But that's the first technology. That's a big leap. And then the second technology will be uh, kind of related to the ether, right? So I think that the fact of an ether has been suppressed. That was Nikola Tesla's main
Mm,
argument.
hmm.
He argued that our current space-time model, where we have this particle and wave duality, where we
Yep.
believe opposing things at the same time. He thinks that's incorrect, and actually, what you have is an ether medium.
Yep.
And what that would allow then is scalar weapons and gravitic type propulsion.
Mm,
So that's what I really saw is from this Jake Barber's release. If true, it shows that these craft use gravitic type technology where they're using some sort of electromagnetic um, forces, or as we've heard, exotic technologies like zero point fluctuations. Hal Puthoff has forwarded that,
hmm.
and they're controlling that technology with some sort of psionic asset through some crazy consciousness telepathy link. So that's what I confirmed for me from everything else I've looked into on this.
I think that's very interesting. I think that the psionic and the telepathy thing has a lot going for it, but I would like to put forward to you a slightly alternative idea, actually very practical about what the egg might be. I agree with you about psionics, and I definitely think that there's interesting science going on right now about consciousness. And I think we're possibly beginning to find a science of consciousness which could explain some of the telepathy, remote viewing, and telekinesis, and lots of things, especially temporal effects due to a possible quantum effect in our brain. And I think that's ongoing now. And I think the most interesting research is coming from Roger Penrose, and also from anesthesiology, which is a fantastically dark science and might reveal how we become unconscious, so hence revealing consciousness. But I have a slightly more prosaic and practical possible. I mean, it's just bollocks, but it could be. Thing about the egg. Well, so we've established that the range could be a defense contractors range. We've also established that you mentioned specifically the DOE. And from what I'm hearing is that the DOE are often suppliers for surveillance equipment for NRO and other government assets which aren't military. And they definitely, the DOE have been working at their Los Alamos main laboratory on something called aerogel or aeroloi vacuum drones. So the idea of this is that if and I have a very specific question to you as a pilot about atmospheric levels, is that if you could have a long loitering, very, very high altitude drone, unmanned, without visible means of propulsion, it would be a great asset. This very morning, I was contacted by a brigadier from the Indian Air Force who said that there is a system called HAPS, High Altitude Platform Systems, which is currently deployed. Because he told me about it over Gaza, and what the way that that works. And my specific question to you, Chris, is that it's way high. It's troposphere level. It's 60 plus thousand feet. And he says the reason why it works that up there is because one, you're above flight levels, you're above most fixed wing assets because of lift, and you're also above weather. And in fact, the troposphere at that level, 60 plus, is very benign. Although very, very low pressure altitude, there's low air density, so a wing would be enormous and wouldn't be practical. So a lighter than air craft or a buoyant craft is the more correct asset, could be something. And I think that the DOE are possibly working on systems for NRO or something like that with buoyant craft, which are these HAPs. The characteristics of HAPs, buoyant crafts, are that they are unmanned, they are without flight controls or engines, and they are often a lozenge shape, or one of the best shapes for engineering is an egg, because eggs are very strong, in fact. And so it could be possible that what he was recovering was a 20-foot HAP test vehicle. Tell us about about 60,000 feet. Who goes there and what's it like?
Yeah, there's very, very little air, right? So above 60,000 feet is,
Yeah.
and I should remember, but is when you get your astronaut wings. I
Yeah.
think it's 60,000. I don't know. It may
No,
be
no, no, but
70,000.
for fixed wing air, I mean, you wouldn't get lift, would you? I mean, it was way above. I mean, you don't probably want to say the service ceiling of F-16s, but I mean, it's not 60,000 feet, is it?
No, it's public knowledge. It's 50,000 feet for
Right.
an F-16.
Okay.
I've been to like 49,
Wow.
I think 48. No, not even that
Earth.
high, 48.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very high that you can just hear the cabin pressure system just struggling, to get enough oxygen and enough pressure to pressurize the cockpit. And
Yeah.
it's really dark. Yeah, the sky's it's super dark blue, and you can see the curvature of the Earth. So yeah, up that high.
You can see the curvature of the Earth. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
F-22s can go that high. They had issues where they were flying so high that yeah, the pilots were developing, they called it Raptor cough,
Oh,
because the air is so dry. It could also be from how they get the oxygen system. They had serious problems with that, and they
that's
actually
right.
crashed some Raptors because they pressurize, they get their oxygen from outside the aircraft. OBOGs is what it's called.
Oh, yeah.
So they do fight up really high. The other thing is the Global Hawk. That's
Right.
a super large drone. If you've ever seen pictures of that thing, and you never really hear about it in the news. All we hear about is drones, like Predators. You hear that. Those are much lower altitude,
Right.
but the Global Hawk is giant. And if you look at the wings, it's really big.
Uh,
And the wings go out. I think it's bigger than a 737, like its
yeah, that's what I
wingspan.
heard. Yeah.
So if you look at those wings, you can tell how fast a plane goes by its design, right? Its shape. An F-16, you can determine how its max speed is Mach 2.05. That thing you can determine probably how high it flies based on its wing
Right.
diameter. So it's going to fly very high. I don't know, but it'll be up there, up in probably in the 60s.
Oh,
Um,
right. What I hear is that these assets are deployed and they're called pseudo satellites because I mean it's obviously cheaper than a real space asset, and plus they're renewable. You can launch them and bring them down. You don't really want them tethered. The tether tension would be tremendous, and plus you don't want to tell people on the ground where they are. So, I mean, I can physically imagine that a high altitude HAPS, high performance system is practical.
Definitely.
And,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that they exist, but it would
right.
be extremely tactically beneficial. If you could have some sort of balloon type asset that just hangs there. For
Yeah.
one, because satellites, they're very effective, but the problem is they have to fly very fast, right? Even if
Yeah.
if you have you could have a geosynchronous orbit satellite, right, where it's going to be in the
Right.
same position. But you have to get that thing there, and to be geosynchronous, it needs to be very far away. So it's not
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
So the further away you get, the harder it is to see stuff, you know. So our spy satellites is effectively we have 6 Hubbles, I think.
Yeah.
There's one Hubble pointed away from our
Yeah.
planet, and
Yeah.
then there's at least 6 that I know about, pretty much the exact same, probably a better capability, a better model, and they're pointed towards our planet.
Yeah.
If you can look at the messed up uh, look no further than issues on our planet than that one fact right there, that the one Hubble points away. Although we do
Yeah.
have JWST now, do we have a JWST type system searching down? Do we have 6 of
We
them?
do.
That would be a good question. But so the problem is, in order to get a geosynchronous satellite, one that hangs over the same area, it has to be very far away. You're
Mhm.
talking thousands and thousands of miles. And so your ability to get good data is going to be very limited, right?
And
So
they're in
that's why
orbit, so they're going to pass over your area of interest, say Leo satellite for 45 minutes, and then it's going to
I
go
think
away.
it's 90 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
low Earth orbit, but maybe if they get lower, you could do less. But at the space station, it goes around every 90 minutes,
oh, that's right. That's right.
and
90.
it has a very fixed path, right? You can change that path, obviously, but it
Yeah,
requires, an act of your highest level.
sure.
And so your low Earth orbits are going to be much closer. And obviously that would give you better intel, but they're going to go by very fast, right? It's like you're driving by really fast in a car, taking a
Sure.
picture. I think they're only there for like a minute and a half. So you get really intermittent intelligence. So that's why these drones are really effective and very useful is like a global hawk, right? You can put it up
Right.
right over an area. It can fly all day. I think it has 24-hour operations.
Yeah.
But
But they
the
still
problem
need to
is,
come back and land. Some of them might even have 70, Airbus have a 72-hour duration one.
well,
And they have to come back to a base and be refueled and checked. Imagine you could have something that could live up there for as long as you wanted it. And then another possibility, certainly with synthetic aperture radar, if you imagine you had 3 or more of them, you start getting parallax offsets of your radar.
yep.
So you have, and then they could be networked at altitude, horizontally networked. And obviously, I'm guessing the most sensible thing would be to uplink to space rather than downlink to the ground. I mean, I understand the capabilities. Do they exist? I mean, we're not going to be told. Was the egg one of those? I think as an engineer told me the shape of the object and the way that it moved and rolled and how it was recovered with slings and a piece of canvas, as Ross said. It could be one of these. You would think that if it was a genuine ET UAP type craft, they would have taken care of it a bit more. And I don't know. That's what I'm hearing, and it also looks very extraterrestrial. I mean, to an Air Force person who hadn't come across a buoyant craft that had no wings, no propulsion, no communication devices, no markings, egg-shaped, 10, 20 foot long, it would be very, very it would be a shock, as we were all saying this week. He might not have been read into that, but and I think possibly it was in a place that they do test them. a lot of people have been jumping on me saying, well, how do they fly at Mach 6? Well, they don't. I mean, I think that's a myth. I think all that they have the capability of doing is vertical going up and down by altering the buoyancy of the craft. And I think they can do station keeping with altitude in this benign region for a dirigible at 60 plus, because they might have electric thrusters. And of course, they're in a very high solar energy level. They could be electrically recharged. I mean, they're not going to tell me, I think it would look very odd if you saw one. I can imagine when they come back and they're put away to bed in the hangar, what I would do is, by altering the pressurization of them, is just hover them a meter off the ground with the exact buoyancy, so they're not resting on their cell. And you imagine going into a hangar and seeing a 20 or 40-foot tic tac that was hovering. I mean, you would think it was non-human, but I suspect that what he saw was unusual, but possibly man-made.
Yeah, that was Stephen Greer's argument, right? He's a controversial figure, but he says it's a man-made reverse engineered craft.
Right.
So I guess the issue I have with the dirigible argument is that, there's no air up above 60, 70,000 feet. That's the whole reason these aircraft can't fly. That's the reason that the Global Hawk has these super long, giant wings, and it has to travel forward, right, to generate that lift.
Yeah.
Look at the Chinese spy balloon, right?
Right. Yeah.
Get him.
Get him.
Look at the China. Sorry, my dog. He's a
I
killer.
can hear. Good.
Oh yeah. So Loki.
Come on, Fluffy. Oh,
Too.
hey,
I've
Fluffy.
never seen a. He's a
Yeah,
killer.
oh, sweet dog. Great. He
Yeah,
wants to
but
be
look at
on
the
the
Chinese
podcast.
spy balloon. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, but if you look at the Chinese spy balloon, that thing was up at 60, 70,000 feet,
Oh,
but it was giant, right? It had a ton of helium in it,
helium.
right? So which is much lighter than air,
Yeah.
and it still could carry not that big of a payload. I guess it was a pretty
Right.
large payload. But now if you're thinking of a 20-foot long egg,
Right.
it's not going to be able to carry
No.
anything. I don't understand how it would get up to that altitude if it's just using vacuum. It could, because at 18,000 feet you have half the atmosphere that you have at sea level, right? And that
Yeah.
just decreases basically exponentially as you go up. So I just don't understand how it would use just vacuum. It would have to use some sort of technology we don't understand, some sort of electromagnetic technology that
It
would
might.
basically it needs anti-gravity, that object.
Well, the question to you, Chris, and viewers is, what's lighter than air? And, everybody goes helium and hydrogen, but what's lighter than hydrogen? And the answer is nothing. Vacuum potentially has no atomic weight because there's nothing there. And the problem, of course, with vacuum, and the idea of a vacuum balloon was actually Spanish. I mean, but the problem with vacuum balloons is that they will implode, and you'd need some type of structure to stop that. There's no pressure inside and the air pressure outside. I think they don't have much lift or buoyancy. They have to be very large. And you're absolutely right. I mean, they have to also overcome their mass. So they would have to be made of something which is uncrushable and something which is extremely light, plus the assets that they're carrying. So, maybe if the egg could have been a test vehicle testing a novel type of material which wasn't crushable, but didn't actually have any assets. But possibly there are bigger ones, 40 plus feet, propane tic tac shaped craft, which might be HAPS they're not telling me, but I think it is practical. But there might, as you say, be other technologies involved.
Yeah. I don't, yeah, I'd have to consider because even if it's vacuum, I don't see how it could get up to that altitude. You know, maybe if you have it vacuum, it could go to 20,000 feet, you know, which would still be very effective. Because if what I didn't mention earlier is the global hawk has to move, right? So
Right.
that means it's really going to be easily detectable. But
Hmm.
if you have something that sits there and it's low observable already because it's shaped like an egg, and maybe you put some sort of material on it and it's not moving, now it's going to be a very effective. It's going to be very hard to actually detect this
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
even at like 20,000 feet or something. Um,
Hmm.
but then you still
Light.
need you still
Hmm.
need the payloads, you know. So if it's totally seamless, you know, yeah, A, how is it moving around? And then where is your actually payload? You know, where's your camera systems? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's still many questions. Either way, it's extremely advanced technology.
Yeah, yeah, it's extremely advanced technology. I mean, and I think advanced technology exists. If I went over a kind of launch scenario, and I think this will resonate both with possibly a very controversial statement about the Tic Tac and Fravor, and also about Calvin, is that what I would do would be launch it from the ground or even underwater. It would then loiter just above the ground, maybe a few meters, and check its limited lateral capabilities. So it might go into into an oscillation phase when it appears out of the water. It would then transition to a low altitude phase where systems would be checked, Calvin. And then when you press the up button, it would depressurize because it's vacuum rather than helium or hydrogen. It would depressurize and shoot up. And then its only movement would be vertical. The thrusters, if this is how it works, I don't know. The thrusters would only be station keeping, so it would need to um, whatever buoyant maximum buoyancy level it would reach, it would need to stay in, say, a 1 kilometer circle, and that could easily be done by electric thrusters from solar power. And I think that the SAR and cameras and communication assets could just be embedded into into its shape. But so that's my scenario.
Yeah, I think yeah, it just doesn't match with any of the observations, you know, from the
Right.
witnesses. If you look at like uh, Calvin, basically they say it shot straight up immediately. And if you're talking about, you know, pumping out
Yeah,
air, turning it into a vacuum, I
it would
think
be
you would definitely
slow.
see some sort of yeah, it would accelerate
It
up.
would accelerate.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then if you talk about yeah, like the Tic Tac as well, the same thing is it was just the way it moved. It was not with inertia, is what he said. You know, if so, I don't know how you would do that with just pressurized systems. You know, if you say it's a vacuum object, and then you're somehow controlling it with like air, if you're trying to
Yeah.
shoot air out one side like we do for spacecraft, you know, it's a current system.
Yeah.
You're still going to have it'll still move with inertia.
Mm.
And I don't
Yeah.
understand
Fun.
how it would just accelerate away like a bullet. That
I,
just doesn't make
I
sense.
agree. Yeah. Imagine the Calvin craft was a stealthy high altitude drone object, which makes sense in its timing for the invasion of Q8.
Yeah.
But yeah, the way that it would transition from hovering to going up would be an acceleration. It wouldn't be instant. So yeah, the, there's mysteries out there. But Chris, as you have also got me, um, um, what would you like to ask me about been going on and the things that I've been saying on my channel in the same way that I follow you very closely?
Yeah, excellent. I've been following the BLC1,
Hmm.
the breakthrough listen.
Yeah.
signal. I think that's extremely interesting. So I'm curious to get any updates you have on that.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, I think that I really put my neck on the line with that. I originally got the information that the BLC1 signal BLC Breakthrough Listen Candidate 1 from Parkes radio telescope was genuine from a senior European radio astronomer. And I think that that was very much damped on or stomped on by Breakthrough Listen, who published a report saying that they couldn't confirm whether it was a human interference. But using kind of Occam's razor, their argument for human interference is actually quite weak because it was a single point source in the direction of a known exoplanet. And when they pointed the telescope away and back, it was always there. It also was in the electromagnetic narrowband spectrum, which isn't a spectrum of normal human telecommunication, but it might be an extraterrestrial form of EM radiation. And then the real thing, which they also actually kind of ignored, that came out after their report was Parkes discovered on subsequent looking that it was Doppler shifted over the 2 hours that they could stay on target. And that the Doppler shift indicated a movement, either a rotational or a, going away or coming towards us, an orbit or a rotation. So the human interference argument is that it was a satellite that pointed always in the same direction, that was in lockstep with an exoplanet, that was using electromagnetic frequencies that humans don't use, and it was Doppler shifted. I mean, yeah, it might be. I was like, okay, but for me, that raised a much bigger question. And what's come out of me going, oh, that's a bit odd, is why aren't they being a bit more upfront and why aren't they being a bit more optimistic? Because, Chris, in 2025, we now with JST, James Webb Space Telescope, and incredibly new networked radio telescopes that have now been networked by an organization in the Netherlands called Astron. So forget about Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere. We're all linked now. We can join a giant radio telescope from a very big one in South Africa, the Square Kilometre Array in Australia, and European assets, mainly LOFAR and even places like Jodrell Bank, now can all be networked. And AI analysis of the signal, even if it's not in real time, it's offline later, can now find the possibility of non-human technological signature is real. I mean, we have that asset, and then the James Webb Space Telescope can now look at the spectral analysis of the atmosphere of an exoplanet. So you're an exoplanet, and you're transiting your star, and you're making a little black dot, but the black dot is the hard bit, and between the black dot and the star is an atmosphere. And the James Webb can now do spectral analysis on the light of that tiny sliver of atmosphere from the light coming from the star behind it and passing through the atmosphere. And I don't know why they're not saying this, but a group in Cambridge in England have got a biosignature, signatures of the type of biology, which, I mean, I'm not saying they're mammalian. It could be bacteria, it could be plants, it could be anything. But life in any form, we've not found a plant or a bacteria on Mars. It would be to know that we're not alone in the universe might be Mr. Buggy. I mean, I would just want to know. I think we live in 2025 in a very interesting era where we now have the tools to confirm that we're not alone. And I think the bigger question that I had to face is why isn't SETI and Breakthrough Listen and China and Russia and other countries not saying? And I think they don't. I think there's a kind of a concern about releasing the information right now. The team in Cambridge absolutely confirm a biosignature, and I think that the Breakthrough Listen one and other candidates that Breakthrough Listen are paying a lot of money to look at could well be a technological signature. And I think there's a cover up basically. I think we will look back and say in 2024 that crazy goat farmer in France was actually was actually onto something. But I've certainly had an awful lot of criticism. I'm not on the Breakthrough Listening Christmas card list.
Is it concurrent, the biosignature with Proxima Centauri?
No, no, it's a
Oh,
completely different exoplanet.
okay.
No, no, that would be very interesting. Um, The other thing about technological signatures is that they don't need to be EM electromagnetic signatures. They might be light. I mean, there might be a lights, photons emitted from a city or a reflection of something which is, you know, possibly, a mechanical structure such as the equivalent of a solar panel, and and in the biologic the biological signatures could also be a chemical signature, proving, for example, that chlorofluorocarbons from air conditioning plants, that doesn't occur naturally here on Earth. It's effectively, you can do spectral analysis. I'm telling this story wrong. You can do a spectral analysis which could detect a chemical technological signature because it would need a society that makes chemicals. And I think this is going on right now. And for some reason, humanity it's not being shared. That's my update.
Yeah, I did a couple videos last year on K12b. I
Yeah,
think they found dimethyl sulfide there, which is
yeah,
supposedly only produced by protoplankton.
right. So
So I
I mean,
think,
I think um, the guy who told me about Breakthrough Listen when I said, "What? Why are they jumping on me? Why are they now saying it's all human interference and they're not?" He said his answer is very interesting. He said, although SETI seem to have a mandate to inform the world about extraterrestrial intelligence, they don't want to. Because as soon as you come out and say, we're not alone, everybody says, what are they like? What are they saying? What music are they playing? And all those questions which they couldn't answer. Their communication, detecting them, and most of it's going to be, non salient living matter is one thing, but then communicating and answering the questions that people who aren't coming from a science background would want to answer immediately. SETI are really supposedly shying away from that and are going, we want to be at least 3 steps ahead before we announce it. So I think they've found it. I think we have the tools, definitely. And I think they have found it. And I think they are holding their fire and not wanting to tell the general public. My inside information is that governments have been told. There was a very interesting leak from the British government where the Department of Trade and Industry wrote a report to the Keir Starmer Labour government in Britain saying, talking about possible exploitation of the fact of ET. Well, they wouldn't do that unless somebody's told them that there's something possibly being found. And the Vatican updated their protocols to bishops. So I think it's real.
yeah, I think it's a few interesting points there I just thought of. The first is I'm drafting, I have a manuscript on a fractal holographic universe. Uh, and
Good.
what I found with it is every level of life actually emits some form of electromagnetic radiation. What we found is DNA actually emits biophotons, so they're actually
Hmm.
you can detect certain electromagnetic emissions when DNA replicates, when it repairs itself. Cells, what they're finding is they actually emit what's called biophotons,
Hmm.
where they can actually communicate across, distances really inside your body, actually using biophotons. If you
Uh,
look at humans, actually, we emit obviously thermal electromagnetic energy, right? That's what we're picking up on these FLIR systems, these IR
yeah.
systems. But we also emit brain waves, and from your heart actually emits
Yep.
waves. We pick this up through EKGs. That's what they're
EKG. Yeah.
testing,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
But it's outside your body, can be detected. And actually, every animal on the planet emits some sort of brain. Every animal with the brain and
Right.
must be a nervous system emits these frequencies, which is quite interesting, right? Your brain waves
Yeah.
relate to your state of consciousness. We talked earlier, you mentioned anesthesia,
Yeah.
but your brain waves, the frequency they're at, will determine your state of consciousness, right? If you're in a deep sleep, it's going to be very low frequency. You're going
We
to be
know
in
that.
theta, and then you start to wake up, you'll be in delta, and then kind of what we're in now is probably alpha, which is your kind of awake state.
Mm-hmm.
And so we emit these frequencies. If you look at our society now, we're going to emit certain electromagnetic frequencies as well. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to emit all of our communication systems, all of our communication networks. You look at the electricity through the lines, um, all going to be
Yep.
detectable.
Yeah.
And so when SETI decides to look for signals, all they focused on was narrowband electromagnetic radio waves, right? That's all
Right.
they're looking at. And I think it's very limiting,
Uh,
because I think there's many other, uh, different electromagnetic emissions that we could be trying to detect. And if we
yeah.
we talked earlier also about telepathy, right?
Right.
Every single alien encounter I've ever heard about is telepathic. There's not a single alien encounter where they come down and the alien just started
Yeah.
talking to
Why?
the person,
Yeah. Right. Right.
right? Every single encounter
Yeah.
is telepathic, is
Yeah.
through some sort of consciousness or whatever brain link. Um, I just find it very interesting that if we just go by all of the knowledge that we currently have on alleged aliens, it's not through, they're not transmitting, with these little devices.
No.
They're not sending waves to each other. They're communicating telepathically. And
Mm.
so I really think we should have some sort of, a SETI that thinks about this or considers it, that maybe what if we actually did do like a CE5 protocol? What if that is the
Right.
way to communicate, or to actually prove alien life will be actually through consciousness telepathic communication. I think they're looking in the wrong place, essentially.
Right.
My argument.
I think that's they're looking in the wrong place. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, for years, because of the limited budget of SETI, they were looking for aliens saying hello, and they didn't find a signal, and they were looking for that hello message only in one wavelength, which was the hydrogen band, and that proved nothing. And yeah, no, I think being open-minded is very, very good for searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. And I think we are becoming better and more broad-minded on how physics works and how biology works. Chris, this has been a great chat. I learn a lot from you. It's really like what you're doing and that you're so open-minded and you have some great guests and some really good ideas. So it's an honor and a privilege always to talk to you. So thank you very much for today. And yeah, let's keep in touch. We live in interesting times.
Yes, very exciting times, Simon. Thanks again for having me on, and yeah, always a pleasure. I love getting your alternate views, and
Yeah.
the angle you're looking at, I think, is really important. We should be looking at all possibilities for what these things could be, and making sure we're dotting all the I's, if you will.